Welcome to the American Academy of Grief Counseling and its video on multicultural counseling and gender. And this is part of a larger series of videos that include various ethnicities, creeds, as well as gender and sexual orientation in regards to counseling and the critical importance of multicultural competencies by counselors, whether clinical or pastoral, and how they approach these various target populations themselves. In this particular video, we're dealing with gender and sexual orientation. So what we want to first look at is the issue of oppression with gender and sexual orientation. Now, oppression ideologies identify various groups based on gender, race, religion, ethnicity, gender, as well as sexual orientation. Now, oppression ideologies are important, but we do not want to also completely accept them because there's other ways that they can cause harm and division as well with the various dominant cultures. But yet they are extremely important in exposing historical and also current oppression ideologies that exist. Unfortunately, many of them begin just by the very historical nature of the view of oppression with some Marxist ideologies that usually create what we would refer to as a common enemy. Common enemy approach in oppression ideology looks at a particular oppressed group and the oppressor and how this can be rectified, how the oppressor can be defeated. What is the oppressor doing to oppress the oppressed group in itself and how it can be stopped? Unfortunately, sometimes the common enemy, while it does point out a historical enemy or a current enemy, it also generalizes a particular oppressing group based the fact that the oppressing group may share a same religion, the oppressing group may share a same origin, such as European. And in these cases, then the common enemy will irritate others who have no form or intent of oppressing another group, although they share a common ancestry or a common creed where this oppression occurred. And this is why when we're looking at overcoming oppression, we look at more at a common humanity. At least I feel that is a better approach, where we look at the commonness of all of human nature and the evilness of oppression, no matter who it comes from, whether it's a dominant culture of a certain era or a different era. Whether you share a religion with those of the oppressed or a culture of those of the oppressor, it should not matter. What matters most should be this idea that we are all human beings and we all work together to rid oppression of particular groups. Again, common enemy causes a division and sometimes, in my opinion, causes a negative reaction within certain individuals who share maybe a culture or a creed or a value that might be shared with the oppressor themselves, while maybe the individual doesn't share the idea of oppression in itself. So, how the dominant culture responds with when it's accused can sometimes cause more division when we utilize a common enemy a paradigm as opposed to a common humanity, which looks more for compassion and unity within the world instead of seeing two opposing forces consistently. Now, whether we're using common humanity lens or a common enemy lens, it's important to understand that women and LGBT communities have faced historical oppression due to their gender roles within culture and also a patriarchal structure that has existed primarily in the West. Of course, women have naturally and historically been regulated to home life, mainly because of the maternal instinct. They have been unjustly refused equal rights, which also includes voting, as well as discrimination in the workplace and equal pay. In addition, reproductive rights has continued to remain a central topic within the social field and any election cycle itself. LGBT communities, TQ communities, have also faced oppression and persecution based on their sexual orientation, their gender identification, and various social norms and beliefs that exist within the dominant culture that place themselves as outsiders. Now, before we go back into LGBTQ concerns, let's first look at gender and especially the role that feminism has played. And feminism sometimes can be an ugly word, but it also can be a wonderful word depending on the perspective and sometimes the extremity of its use. Feminism looked to grant women rightfully equal rights. The women's suffrage movements began in the late 19th century and carried through the 20th century. While women through these movements gained better rights in terms of the right to vote and also how they are viewed in society, inequality and prejudice remained, even though some were able to stand taller within society itself. So, when dealing with women in counseling, women face an array of issues. And as a man, I'm speaking not necessarily from experience, but definitely from just historical reports that women face an array of issues that place them within an intersectional area of oppression. For instance, if one woman is African American, then the gender of the woman and the fact that she's African American adds a term in counseling referred to as double jeopardy, in that there is a higher risk of stress and oppression because the individual fits two boxes of oppression. Now, obviously, not everything is a one size fits all. There are individuals who might not face oppression. And as you counsel more individuals, you discover that what one would assume to be an oppression for one within a group isn't for the other. So we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. But still, statistically, women face a lot more oppression than men in regards to what they're able to do, especially in regards to equal pay and discrimination in the workplace. Women also face higher cases of abuse, rape, and sex trade, especially in Africa. So, if one doesn't think gender matters, some of these places and situations will definitely manifest that it does exist, even if some individuals who would never think of doing these things turns a blind eye to it. So, with prejudices, women in politics and workplace all face these types of discriminations despite advances, despite women becoming doctors, becoming elected officials. While it's still there, there is in the background, in the shadows, still a very ugly face of oppression and discrimination that exists in certain corners and still seeks to rear its ugly head whenever it can. Now, again, I mentioned as a man, I am speaking for certain historical circumstances, but also as a counselor, I also need to assess my own gender and how my gender as a man might affect a woman entering the room and what her past has in regards to men, and see how maybe as me as a male figure might have a particular effect on the client counselor counseling relationship itself. And we need to be mindful as counselors of differences that exist between the client and the counselor, regardless of gender, but also with culture and so forth. And it's something that we don't want to be in regards to a colorblind type situation, because then we can miss so many important cues and different problems that exist for a particular group, and also understand how that particular group views ourselves. Now, as we return to LGBTQ counseling, there are a variety of counseling concerns that we need to consider as counselors. LGBTQ members of society face oppression and violence in the external world as well as within the home. Many who make the difficult decision to come out and express their sexual orientation or their gender face multiple problems within their family over the decision, especially in terms of maybe the family's religion or the family's view on homosexual rights, and this can cost many individuals to lose their family or lose some of their friends, even though there have been rights granted more so since the 90s and as the 21st century has proceeded. Forms of marriage and adoption has now been granted, but even with these advances, there's still a negative labeling by some individuals with these types of individuals who are homosexual or transgender. And these external as well as internal conflicts all come into the counseling room with you. Indeed, there are social wounds that also exist. Those who are part of the LGBTQ community face a variety of threats. Nightclubs sometimes are shot up when individuals go out, and there's always that threat of a potential oppressor, a potential racist individual who could harm someone of the LGBTQ community itself. Those external stresses are also again amplified, as I said, with the decisions that they have within the home, with religious dogma and social norms, for the most part, being at odds with many of their moral decisions. How do they conform their religion, of which they held, many of which consider homosexuality to be an immoral act, and how do they proceed forward with that conflict? There are also issues of transgenderism, which as different from LGBT, different from gay and lesbian groups, but deal with the idea of what we refer to as a gender being different than the actual sex of an individual. So an individual might be biologically born a male or a female, but they might see themselves as opposite. They might see themselves as a man, even though they were biologically born as a woman. Now, past DSMs before 5 might see this as a state of gender dysphoria and see treatment necessary. But today, it is an accepted belief within psychology that an individual has a right to perceive themselves as they wish without any pathology existing within that self. Now, whether or not the DSM considers a pathology to exist is irrelevant to the point of the emotional, mental, and social strains that transgender individuals face, the public criticism, the political debates, and also the suicidal ideations that many might have in regards to the unhappiness with their body in relationship to how they feel, as well as how society responds to them in public with use of various pronouns being used or not used. So counselors need to be aware of the high levels of possible depression or signs of suicide in some members within the LGBTQ community based on these internal and external struggles facing homosexuals as well as those in the transgender community. Now, there are opposing views and proper integration of opposing views. So obviously we spoke about common enemy and common humanity in regards to how individuals who are oppressed are treated. Common enemy, in many cases, would like to dismiss Judeo-Christian ideals, as well as pose heterosexualism and side-genderism as sometimes taboo words. So, for instance, an individual such as myself as common enemy, being a white male straight Christian, I click a lot of boxes of what would be known as an oppressor. Now, obviously, I don't believe in any of these oppressing views against other individuals. So there we see, again, a problem with common enemy. Instead, I prefer common humanity, where we look at every individual as equal and we love every individual, but we also respect the differences. So if we start to dismiss all of everything that Christians or Jews or Muslims believe, then we start to oppress another culture, which is exactly what is happening to the LGBTQ and many women within their gender roles and sexual orientations. So the idea is to remove all forms of oppression, to find a common humanity, and for once, a mutual respect. So there has to be a fine line between the dominant culture maintaining its inherent religious beliefs, which are valuable, and also granting rights to those within the LGBTQ community who are transgender, homosexual, or bisexual, etc., etc. So those of other faiths have a right to believe that something might be immoral. They have a right to believe that it is not natural if they so choose. And they have a right not to be labeled as bigots because they have a religious belief. And I think this is something that's lost in a of the news, that these individuals aren't necessarily bigots. They're not going to look to cause violence or oppression or prejudice against another individual. Instead, they might be very open and loving while disagreeing. And what has happened to that? Why can't we still be able to disagree but still respect one another? So there has to be a dismissal of this us against them, and we need to help individuals. And that's what I mean by a proper integration of opposing views. We need to be aware of the oppression, and we need to be able to help. So those in counseling, especially counselors, need to refrain from past biases that they might have. It's very well easily a counselor, especially helping those in grief, they might have past biases, religious biases. So again, a belief is fine, but what if a counselor has a belief that believes that many of the moral values of the LGBTQ community are immoral? Well, that needs to be shelved. And the idea is to do no harm and to work with the individual. And that's why a lot of these secular counselors need to do this, but also those in Christian counseling. Now, Christian counseling is pastoral in nature, but it has a little bit different realm and ability to roam than maybe secular counseling. Because individuals coming to Christian counseling are seeking a Christian paradigm, a Christian morality. So they're looking for that biblical account. So if you're in Christian counseling and someone is of the LGBTQ community, it is a situation where the Christian values need to be expressed, but at the same time in a way that is non-harmful. One thing that needs to be put to sleep is these ideas of conversion therapies and how harmful they are, and also challenging individuals who are within the LGBT community about who they are and what they feel, and making them feel immoral or dirty. And this can lead to various suicidal ideations. So when you're treating someone for grief who already fits the oppression boxes for gender or LGBTQ groups, a lot of times they're coming with a lot of internal and external baggage and internal conflict. And the least that needs to be told is one, if outside of Christian counseling, especially, is one's views on the morality of an action. These types of decisions can maybe push an individual to an even greater depression. Instead, counselors need to help individuals feel good about themselves and to promote healing and to help individuals find the necessary public helps that are available and supports that are available to help that individual. And sometimes that means counselors need to become social warriors for their client to help them understand. So that's just a little bit on the diversity that exists within multicultural counseling in regards to working with individuals of different gender, women and men, as well as working with those within the LGBTQ community, whether it's homosexual, bisexual, or transgender, or whatever type of moral beliefs they might have. Below is our grief counseling certification, the link, as well as our number at 330-652-7776. And our email is info@aihcp.org. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.